From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Ken has been a longtime supporter of and participant in the National Book Festival. I remember interviewing him at I think it was the 2007 festival, we decided, when he was talking about the war, his documentary on World War II, which started conversations with veterans in households all over the country. A reminder that you can support the festival with the gift of a donation by checking the information in the festival program and on the app. The organizers welcome your help in making the festival possible next year and every year. This amazing gathering would not be possible without the support of sponsors and book lovers like you. If you would, please turn your cell phones off, lest I be forced to quote the late Oliver Sacks, whose sharp response to a beeping phone while he was giving a talk reminded me happily that C-SPAN doesn't censor rough language. Some of you may have seen that. The way we'll proceed is that I'll ask a few of the 10,000 or so questions I have for Ken and then invite you to ask some of yours. There are microphones, I think if I'm seeing right, in the aisles, here and here. So please line up at those when the time comes. Be advised that our gathering is being recorded for the archives. So if you're a spy or an international person of mystery, you may want to remain seated. Otherwise, be brave and step right up. I'm really not going to give Ken a very long introduction, although he's worthy of one, because I do think most of you know his work by now. Don Hewitt, who created 60 Minutes at CBS, was often asked about its philosophy. His response was simple: tell me a story. Ken Burns is a storyteller. He's also a historian who understands that a great way to tell a story is to make it personal. A big, important story can be told by finding the small, important stories. The famous Sullivan-Ballou letter you heard in the Civil War is a perfect example. You can't hear it and not be moved by it, and you come to understand that terrible war in a very personal way. Ken has a new book, which is here on the table behind us, Grover Cleveland Again, A Treasury of American Presidents. It's beautifully illustrated by Gerald Kelly. It's intended for younger readers, but I defy an older reader not to take great pleasure in it too. It's the latest addition to Ken's wonderful body of work, and I ask that you join me in welcoming him. Ken Burns.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Ken, we're at the National Book Festival. Do you remember a time when books became important in your life for the first time? I was lucky enough to have a father who read to me before I could read.
My answer is that I don't remember a time when books weren't important to me, because I was read to from the moment I was born by both my parents, and it became a huge part of it. And though my mother was sick, I was able to also spend a lot of time, very precious time, with my father, who would read me long novels that would take several weeks to read, books that he had gotten as a child. And so I felt that they connected me. I was speaking earlier this morning and remind people that often children born in poverty have a deficit. By age 3, they hear 30 million fewer words than people who are not born in poverty. And we begin to understand that despite all the other obvious economic pressures, that we have this lasting deficit that is going to be very difficult to make up. And I feel so extraordinarily fortunate that not only was I read to, but I've also been able to read to my own kids. I have 4 daughters ranging in many ages, and I think the intimate connection I have with them has been forged over books.
I understand the family was an influence in the origins of Grover Cleveland Again.
So you are talking about a person who makes films about American history, tries to find those stories. Thank you very much for your generous introduction. And when it was time for bed, when the books were finished reading, when the lights were off and I was either lying next to my daughters in bed or in a chair next to, I would drill them on the presidents. So I would say George, they would say Washington, I would say John, Adams, Thomas, Jefferson, James, Madison, James, Monroe. And we would go through, and halfway through, you get to this wonderful anomaly which always delighted them as they remembered. In the beginning, I would tell them stories about each of the presidents, or just say who is next and some important circumstance. But when you get to Grover Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison, Grover Cleveland Again, and each daughter, one is now turning 35, when she first memorized it, when we finished it, I said, you know what, Sarah, we should write a children's book. That was 30 years ago. Her sister, 4 years younger, Lily, same thing. I said, we should do a children's book. I'm really serious this time. Olivia, who's 11, 6 years ago, committed all the presidents to memory that way. And I said, now it's time actually to do something. And my youngest, Willa, who's 5, the same age as my granddaughter, who I haven't yet drilled the presidents on, she did it. And if you go to the Random House Children's Book website and look this up, you will see Willa Burns, age 5, reciting the presidents, which means anybody can do it. But the idea was to originally do kind of an abecedaria, something that would just be presidents to memorize. But as we got into it, we realized that these were all human beings and somehow that they had been placed at a remove from us, put up on pedestals. They were no longer human beings. They were the sum total of their successes or their mistakes. And these were all people who had parents, who had siblings for the most part, who had pets, who had hobbies, who had kids, and that it was important to humanize them. And so the book became, richer and richer and denser in that, so that like a kind of Grand Canyon of many layers, it's possible to just use it to help you memorize the presidents and know what the number is. Abraham Lincoln, by the way, is 16. That it was also possible to learn a little bit more about them. And so we have what we call the baseball card, the information of when they were born, when they died, when their administration was, their brothers, their sisters. But then a large section that would be helpful for kids a little bit older writing book reports, and even older than that writing more extensive book reports. And so we think we have, as Random House calls it, Knopf calls it, a treasury of the American, that this is something that you could hold on to and last for a long time.
Part of the problem for a historian or a documentarian or a writer in general, it seems, is knowing what to leave out.
Yes.
This book could have been 1,200 pages long.
It's pretty interesting. This took a lot longer than I thought it would take. It was a lot harder than I thought it would be. I'm used to working on projects for many, many years. I have a film on the history of the Vietnam War that's coming out a year from now. And when it comes out, I will have worked on it more than 10 years. So we're used to that, but I had thought that you could just scoop in, and you can't. You have to do as much work for this book as you had to do for even a biography of the president. And we had it vetted by a number of distinguished historians who, to our great, great happiness, said, I learned stuff that I didn't know. And there are folks who have spent their lives studying the presidency and writing, big, huge, thick books about it. So in order to figure out what to leave out, I live in New Hampshire. We make maple syrup there. And it takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. And I'm sure the amount of material that we collected for each of these presidents was at least 40 times what we could possibly use. And then the work was how to tell a story that didn't make them wrong, that made them interesting and humanized them, but also let you know that there are some very potent issues going on in American history about race, about money, about honesty, about all sorts of things, and that's part of the book as well.
Are you a merciless self-editor?
Yeah, we're pretty tough on each other. I should say from the start, I should have said from the start that David Blistein, who is my oldest friend, and Cauley Powell, who works in my office, were both instrumental in making this book happen, and their names are listed on the title page. So we would spend a great deal of time together sifting and digging and shaping and writing and rewriting. But yeah, you want to get it just right.
Do you love research? You must at this point.
Love it. I mean, I just had the great pleasure of meeting the new Librarian of Congress, and I think it's the librarians of Congress who should be billionaires. It's and teachers, our values are a little bit upside down. But I've spent my life in libraries and archives and museums trying to figure out how to make the past come alive. And
do you always find a surprise when you're digging through stuff?
Every single project is a constant surprise. I was working on this Civil War series, and that is the most important event in American history. But as you said in your introduction, sometimes the smaller detail is more telling. If you think about it, the architecture of the atom is the same as the architecture of the solar system. so that you could find, as the poet William Blake said, the world in a grain of sand. And that's what we try to do. To make something, to personalize it, is to often go down for the telling detail. So not too far from here is a little town called Winchester, Virginia. It changed hands 72 times during the Civil War. We don't think of American towns as changing hands, let alone 72 times. And that always is the thing that I go back to just be reminded that these little nuggets are often incredibly instructive. Humor is also another thing that is very helpful. You know, alligators in bathtubs and working in your dad's saloon, as Martin Van Buren did. These are all stuff that helps us understand these complicated people that we'd more often abstract and make the subject of term papers, and not the fact that they were flesh and blood like us, that they had to put on their pants one leg at a time, or hopefully at some point put on their dresses, you know.
A reminder, if you'd like to ask a question of Ken in just a couple of minutes, you might even want to kind of queue up at the microphones now, just to avoid a frenzied rush to get up here. I just have a couple of more questions before I open it up to those of you who have them from the floor here. You're best known as a documentarian. Do you tend to think visually when you write?
No, as a matter of fact, that's a wonderful question, and I never really have a chance to explain this. I am drawn to visual things, but I will go out, say, to the Library of Congress working on the Civil War, and I will just film all the photographs from the Brady collection that I'm drawn to, visually, because they tell good stories, unconcerned with whether they're going to illustrate some part of the script. And too often films are made that way. Let's just look for the image that's going to get us through paragraph 2 of page 7 of episode 6. And that's a horrible way to do it. You miss a lot of good stuff that way. So I go and try to film the good stuff. Meanwhile, as the left hand is doing that, the right hand, unaware of what the left hand is doing, is writing stories with writers, so that we are unconcerned with whether we have visual material to illustrate it. We just want to tell that good story in a literary sense. And then editing, the most critical period for us, as it is, you know, for most of us, is where the horse trading goes. And sometimes we find ourselves with an abundance of image for which there are no stories to use, but then you find a way to use them and create new scenes. And sometimes you have a story that you have to have, but there are no images, and you invent new ways to do it, using some of those images or some equivalencies. It's incredibly exciting. It tends to lengthen and attenuate our process, but that's the best way. And then there's a kind of durability and evergreen nature to the stories. I mean, mostly when you say documentary, most people think of people who are advocating a particular point of view, exposing something that's very relative in that moment. But quite often, history is addressing all of the same issues we're addressing today, but it's doing it about events that took place seemingly before and unrelated to us, but are so resonant with human nature. History doesn't repeat itself. We're not condemned to repeat what we don't remember. But human nature never changes. And understanding the patterns and the themes and the motif of the past arm you in the best possible way to understand the present. You know, Ecclesiastes said it better than me. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. And that means that human nature superimposes itself over the random chaos of events, and we can perceive those patterns, and that's what we do. Mark Twain is supposed to have said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And it's a wonderful phrase if in fact he did say it. But I've spent my entire professional life, 40 years, trying to hear those rhymes, trying to hear that stuff. And so quite often, when you take a subject that seems safely, distantly in the past, it is resonant with today. I'll give you a simple example. Our recent film this past spring on Jackie Robinson, which was sort of exploding some of the sentimental myths about him and telling a much more dynamic and complicated person, is speaking to the themes that are on the front page of today's paper about Black Lives Matter, about driving while black, about stop and frisk, about integrated swimming pools, about integration, about housing disparities, about wage disparities. All of the things that are still omnipresent in our discussion about race today are happening in the context of a story that we've normally just relegated to a happy story of a guy who turned the other cheek. He did, and it's impressive, but the story of the real Jackie Robinson is more important. That's why I think coming to terms with these guys in a human dimension allows them to remain fresh and new to us, just as we deal with many of the same themes. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson were dealing with the same themes of race we're dealing with today.
And a conversation are we ever going to finish that conversation?
I don't think so. I mean, and we have to be pretty honest with ourselves. This is our original sin. We know as a country that where we were founded and when, July 4th, 1776 in Philadelphia, and we know what our catechism is. It's the second sentence of the Declaration. It begins, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal." Yet I have to stop right there, a third of the way through that wonderful sentence, arguably the second greatest sentence in the English language. The first is obviously, "I love you." But after that, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better statement, a sentence. Because the guy who wrote that owned more than 100 human beings and didn't see the hypocrisy, the contradiction, or see fit in his lifetime to free any of those human beings, and set in motion an American narrative, symbolically, but also literally, that is constantly struggling to deal with that. And as what's going on today, it happens to be Charlotte or Tulsa, but a year and a half ago, it was Charleston or North Charleston or Ferguson or wherever. It's there. So we've got to deal with it, and many of these people, most of those people, were in some way, shape, or form either having to deal with it or consciously trying not to deal with it, that then moved us closer to civil war or into some of the problems we suffer today. So you can get to the heart of who we are by picking up almost any one of these mini biographies and understanding, wow, as William Faulkner said, history is not was, but is.
I have a lot more questions, but you have a lot of questions too. So let's get to some of those, and then I'll wrap things up with a final question of my own. I think you have a book signing coming up, I think,
at
1:30. So for those of you who would like to have your copy of Ken's book signed by Ken, 1:30 is the time for that. Let's start over here.
As a middle school librarian who has to try and teach students the art of doing research and the benefits when it's hard.
It is hard.
I was wondering, were you a student that fought that, or did you find that was something that drove you and that's why you became a writer?
I think I think it's hard for everybody, and there's some resistance to it, to not just, I mean, today we have the luxury, but also the deficit of being able to sort of look it up on Wikipedia and get something.
Information overload.
But it's not just that, but when I first went to my site at Wikipedia, it gave me 3 films I'd never made and took away 4 that I had. And it took a year and a half to correct that. So those of you who are about to trust that, one of the key hallmarks of not only research but of journalism and history is to triangulate, to get a couple of different things right. And I always found as I got older, the hunt was actually more exciting than the final thing, because you've discovered stuff you never realized you were interested in. I was at the Museum of the Confederacy in Richmond going through all the photographs. We finished, I said, "Do you have others?" He said, "Only seconds. You want to see them?" And I said, "Sure," meaning duplicate copies. So he brought out a box, a cardboard box filled randomly, not filed away in acid-free paper. And we went through and I said, "Nope, nope, nope." A couple times I said, "Yep," and I filmed them. At the bottom, tucked under the flap, I pulled it out. It was a picture of Robert E. Lee with this sort of enigmatic Mona Lisa smile. And I said, "I've never seen this photograph before." And I heard the greatest thing I've ever heard from a librarian archivist ever, which is, "Neither have I." And I was like, it was like striking gold in the California gold rush. So
I need you to call my superintendent and tell them that you can't teach students to be curious in 30 minutes.
yeah, thank you.
Also, Ken did not direct Casablanca, for those of you who were wondering.
No, that's right.
We're running out of time. I'm sorry I talked so much here. We got about, what, 10 minutes, something like that? I think, no? Are you even shorter than that? Oh, Ken, they're cutting our time back,
Okay,
so
really
let's
quick,
get to
the
another
lightning
question.
round.
Ken, first of all, thank you so much for the Civil War documentary. Absolute masterpiece. I'm a huge, huge fan. But the talk earlier was focused on how it's a challenge for you to make the historical record personal to people. You're trying to tell a story. I'm curious about your own personal experience when you're immersed in the research and you're looking at primary source material. Have you ever had a personal struggle or an emotional kind of reaction to the material you've been working with and had that immediately?
Always. And in fact, every film is a struggle, as it should be. It ought to obliterate, assassinate conventional wisdom and preconception. And so you come in, all of us are burdened by that, and then all of a sudden when you dig down, it's much more complicated and therefore challenging, but much more interesting, and as you say, sometimes emotionally startling.
Last question for me. Desert Island books, since we're at the National Book Festival. You can have some books to take to your desert island. You can also have some documentaries because you're good at that. What do you want to take with you?
Oh my goodness, I don't know.
You can change this in a year.
I can, and can I pack a lot of books, you know?
You can have a couple.
You know, Abraham Lincoln used the Bible, Old and New Testament, and the works of William Shakespeare. That was basically his education until he was reading for the law. You know, these are great stories. Some are made up, some are fanciful and sort of allegorical. But that's the way we intuit things. So you know, I'm an American. All of my subjects are Americans. I don't think that Mark Twain wrote a bad sentence. He said the difference between the right word and almost the right word was the difference between lightning and the lightning bug. But more to the point, if we're going to go out on a literary figure, Mark Twain said, it's not that the world is filled with fools, it's just that lightning isn't distributed right. That will be funny in 1,000 years if there's still a civilization to talk about, right?
I
mean,
think
think of any other
right.
19th century humorist, whatever they said isn't funny anymore. But that will be funny 1,000 years from now, and everybody gets it.
Ken Burns has to sign some books. He's got to get there. Thank you very much, Ken
Thank
Burns.
you very much. I'm so sorry I couldn't get you a question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.